Welcome back to another Market Movers video. My name is Tyler Nethercott, better known as Teapot, and today I'm looking at the players whose prices have gone up the most over the last year, and I've found 4 key trends that we can use to predict whose prices might be next up in the year to come. Let's take a look. Hey everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining me again. You know, it's really important from time to time to step back and just reflect on what's been happening. The day-to-day can get really busy. I'm sure we've all got extremely busy jobs. And when it comes to the sports card market, it is fast and it is a hustle every day. Things are constantly changing. So sometimes I like to step back and reflect and say, okay, what's been happening in the bigger picture? What's been happening over the last quarter, over the last 6 months, over the last year? And that's exactly what I've done today. We've got some really big changes or things happening in the sports world with NHL playoffs, with NBA playoffs, with the baseball season, well underway. We've got soccer Euros, we've got the Olympics this summer, and then before we know it, it'll be football season all over again. Yes. So what I wanted to do was try to kind of take a minute to pause and figure out what's been happening in the market this last year. We know there's been a lot of different price fluctuations. Ultra modern and modern stuff has seen somewhat of a pullback over the last few months. So I wanted to see if there's any lessons that we could glean using our price movements charts to identify some trends and things that we could use to extrapolate and apply to the upcoming year. So let's go over and take a look. The first page that I started on was just our price movements by card page. And I love this page because it's just a perfect, very simple snapshot of what's been happening with card prices over different time periods. And what I did was I went to the last 365 days. And then I filtered by PSA 10 just to have some consistency. And as I scroll through this list, I noticed some trends that I'm going to explain to you. And the first trend, no surprise here, is that GOAT prices have gone up. Everybody knows that GOAT prices have gone to the moon over the last year. Vintage prices especially have gone up. The first card on our list, Roger Federer. It would have been fun to kind of have everybody guess and put it in the comments. Roger Federer, the number 1 card that has gone up over the last year, his 2003 Net Pro Elite base, numbered to 2000 PSA 10, just pop 88. And if I open up this chart and show you, I just want to point out that actually more than a year ago, and this honestly makes me somewhat nauseous, more than a year ago, I owned at least one of these cards. I had several Roger Federer cards. I can't remember how many of the base to 2000 I had, but I owned at least one of these. And I sold it before this point. I think I sold it before this point. I'd have to go back and look specifically. But I was buying these cards on ComC for like $30, $35, $50, depending on the PSA 10 Federer. When I saw what was happening with Tiger Woods prices, I kind of jumped over and thought, well, why wouldn't Roger Federer be next? He's arguably the greatest tennis player of all time. And I went over and I was finding these Net Pro cards. The population was super low, so they weren't super abundant on eBay. There wasn't a lot of movement on them, though, so I, against my own better judgment almost, I bought like 6 or 7 of them, maybe 8 different Roger Federer cards, a few 10s, a few 9s, and then I kind of was sitting on them and waiting. And then there started to be some movement, and I got to the point where I was like, well, I'm 8x my money on these cards. I might as well move them now. I did not expect these cards to jump all the way up to almost $7,000. So when you talk about regrets, seeing that card number 1 on the slot for price movements is a bit of a gut check, but you got to be happy for the next guy that hopefully has made some money on that. And honestly, that's a really great card to have in a collection, in a PC. For anybody who's got that kind of capital and wants to have an all-time great portfolio, Roger Federer definitely belongs in the mix there. So Roger Federer is just another proof of the GOAT craze from the last year. So obviously, like I said, the vintage bug, it's kind of bitten collectors and investors alike. Vintage cards of all the different sports card eras are definitely up the most over the last year in general and collectively. So when we think about this, if I look at this card, Federer, I can actually jump over and look at a few other athletes as well. Serena Williams, Conor McGregor, Roger Federer, Nadal, Mike Tyson, Phil Mickelson. Obviously, we knew Tiger Woods cards had already gone up. All of these players have something in common in that they're from sports that are less popular, but which people can still really appreciate. And some of these have obviously very loyal fan followings, but I imagine that for people who like to have collections of all-time great players, they're going to be going after these different types of athletes, regardless of how closely they necessarily follow something like tennis or boxing or MMA. They're still going to want these cards in their portfolios. And you can see that their prices have all gone up significantly over the last year. The Federer being the most at almost 2,800% increase, but certainly a ton of price movement from these others. And take a look at this. Certainly some U.S. love here, but a female athlete, Serena Williams, at $7,500, above Federer, above Nadal. But if we look at this kind of makes me think, okay, what else might be next? What could be next? Well, we've got the Summer Olympics this summer coming up. I know Simone Biles cards have been up. There aren't a ton of cards out there for Olympians, but there are some. And in PSA 10 condition, they could be the next ones to really blow up. Michael Phelps cards, Usain Bolt cards, some of these really, really important Olympic athletes, they could be the next ones. Another one to think about is rare inserts and low pop base cards of all-time greats, but not necessarily the greatest. So not Michael Jordan, but think the next tier down, Shaquille O'Neal. Kobe's probably a little closer to Jordan, but if you keep going down to the next tier, the Kevin Garnett's, the Karl Malones, the John Stocktons, the Charles Barkleys, the Hakeem Olajuwons. Specifically, when I think about it, I think about the 90s and the guys who were some of the best athletes from that era, and not just from basketball, but from baseball and football also. Their insert cards compared to the guys who are at the top of the list. So if you go back to the 90s, it's like Barry Sanders cards are very expensive. To some extent, the quarterbacks are up there, but it's really like Barry Sanders at the top. And in baseball, you have Ken Griffey Jr. and Derek Jeter, and then everybody else seems to be down lower. Even some of the other, phenomenally talented players from that era. If you go find their non-rookie cards, but super rare insert cards, sometimes you can find them for extremely, extremely cheap. Or likewise, if you think about like really iconic sets, their base cards, super low population, sometimes pop 1, pop 5 for a PSA 10. And if you compare that second tier of Hall of Fame caliber players to the next level up, you'll see these incredibly huge price differences. I think that as the market is shifting and kind of getting a little bit more risk averse with some of the ultra modern and modern stuff, people will be going back and saying, you know what, that era, the 80s, the 90s, that was my nostalgia. And man, I really loved watching Hakeem Olajuwon play. Oh, here's a Fleer Metal base card that is a Pop 3 in a PSA 10. Maybe I do want to pay up for that more than $80 or whatever the last comp might happen to be. So that's kind of another example of one that I think of in the GOAT chase that people maybe haven't quite caught on to, just because there is so much, but that over time, capital could be reallocated into that more nostalgic stuff from the 90s that people really loved, and away from modern current prism based cards and other things. It's something I've kind of been hearing as I talk with other collectors and people who've gotten back into the hobby over the last few years. And sort of related to that, another card that's gone up significantly is, for example, Magic Johnson's PSA 10 1986 Fleer. Obviously not his rookie card, but the iconic 1986 Fleer set. Look at what this card price has done in the last year. It was floating down under, around $1,000. At one point, it got up to almost $25,000 this year, if those were legitimate sales. But either way, you're still hovering around somewhere between, $10,000 to $15,000 for a card that was down around $1,000. So another, it's really noteworthy to say, super iconic sets, again, of all-time great players. Jordan obviously being the big one from this set, but then you get into players like, Julius Erving, Larry Bird, and Magic Johnson, really, really valuable. People wanting to set build and do other things, so they're going to be looking to these sets. So again, go back to the video I did a few weeks ago, talking about something like Fleer Metal. I look at how Topps Chrome has been blowing up, especially Topps Chrome refractors over the last several months. Every single year of Topps Chrome, people are just, looking at that as like the iconic set from that era for basketball cards. while Fleer Metal is another one that could, get thrust back into the limelight, along with a handful of others from the 90s that are really, really popular. So that's observation number 1. GOATs, all-time great players, and kind of finding a new niche and a new angle that people maybe haven't uncovered yet, but could pick up in popularity over the next year. The next one up, breakout players. Obviously, it makes sense. Players explode, they have a great season, and then their prices are going to go up. This is the one that we try to predict the most often, right? Perhaps most notably amongst all those players from this last year was Josh Allen. Josh Allen's a guy who was kind of polarizing. It's like, can he throw the football? Can he throw it accurately? What type of player is he really going to turn into? And then last year, he has this incredible season, and he leads the Bills to, basically a nail-biter, almost to the Super Bowl, to the AFC Championship game. And his prices reflected, his performance last year. But even more so, they really reflected his team's overall success under his leadership. If I scroll down, you can see that his 2018 Select Concourse card is actually up the most, over 1,800%. His Prism Silver's up, his Concourse Silver, and then he's got his Optic, some of his Optic cards too down here, which is interesting because I think there's potentially some opportunity in Allen's Optic cards comparatively when you look at how the prices have changed on the Select and on the Prism cards. It seems like Optic's kind of falling third, but the population counts are pretty low, and the Optic Hollows are absolutely beautiful in hand. Something to consider if you're thinking about buying into Josh Allen. But who else might we look to for the upcoming 2021 NFL season that would remind me of Josh Allen? Well, if you watched Parker's video from last week, he mentioned that he's looking to be buying Kyler Murray cards. And Kyler Murray is exactly who I would compare Josh Allen to coming into this next season, with the possibility that his cards could really take off. So this is Josh Allen compared to Kyler Murray from this last year. And right away you'll see 13-3 record versus 8-8. AFC Championship game, not so much. But if you look at their stats the rest of the way, aside from the touchdowns, it's really, really, really similar, right? You've got a nearly identical completion percentage. The yards aren't too far off. Interceptions are similar. Sacks are nearly identical. And you've got Kyler rushing for twice as many yards and 3 more touchdowns there. So obviously Allen, better passer rating, more touchdowns, more team success. But what about if we look at Josh Allen's stats from his second year compared to Kyler Murray? If you look at Allen from that year, yes, the team had a better record. Again, the Bills had a pretty good defense that season, but only 20 touchdowns, passer rating of 85, and again, not the same rushing yards and touchdowns as Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray overall, more an electric player, kind of like more in the Lamar Jackson mold, but probably a better passer than Lamar Jackson. He's really got the entire toolkit, and now he's got this, what looks like on paper should be a very, very solid team around him. Still has DeAndre Hopkins, bringing in defensive players, rounding out that Cardinals team. Granted, they are in, a really tough division. The Rams are going to be competitive. The Seahawks are going to be competitive. The 49ers should rebound and be better than they were last year. There's going to be competition for the Cardinals, but Kyler Murray's a guy who could certainly be thrust into the limelight if the Cardinals are winning, if all those new big additions are paying off. And if we look at Kyler Murray's price changes compared to Josh Allen's over the last year, or over the last 6 months, let's say, since the NFL season was kind of, wrapping up, you've got Josh Allen up 144%, Kyler Murray up, well, not really at all. So certainly, I think some opportunity in Kyler Murray as an analog to Josh Allen going into the 2021 season. A couple of other guys who have really gone up, and no surprise here, obviously their performance reflects it. Julius Randle, who could be in line for the most improved player, and Nikola Jokic, who is pretty heavily, I think, at this point, the favorite for the MVP. And their cards have gone up 416% on the Prism base and 213% on Jokic with the Prism base. So other players who could be going up this year, well, first of all, Julius Randle. I think Julius Randle cards could still go up more. I don't think that Julius Randle has the ceiling to get to be like an MVP caliber player. But I do know that Julius Randle is in New York, where he has been the leader of that team this year. New York fans now love Julius Randle, which is just ironic considering he was drafted by the Lakers and then goes to New York. But they're loving him. They're giving him tons of praise. Tom Thibodeau loves Julius Randle. And the Knicks should have a lot of hype going into next season. Regardless of what happens in the playoffs this year, I'm not personally super high on the Knicks this year, but I do think they're going to have hype. RJ Barrett should continue to develop. Who knows what other pieces they might sign in the offseason. So when you look at a card like this, Pop 38, now PSAs, maybe they've got more of them in the hopper coming in, but still very low population cards on Julius Randle because not a lot of people grading his cards, over the last several years. This is only $465 compared to $1,348 for a much higher population count, Nikola Jokic card. So if we sort these cards in order of price, what I've done is I've actually put some other rookies and other kind of key players that I think are worth comparing to these two. And Julius Randle at the bottom here, $465. Below Tatum, Pop 5,000 versus Pop 38. And then obviously Zion, Pop 17,000. So another guy I think could go up, actually, is Devin Booker. Now, he's already pretty high, but he's down 33% over the last 180 days. And that's really interesting considering the Suns are, one of the best teams in the West. They're kind of a surprise. If the Suns make a run here in the playoffs, if they win, if they make it to the Western Conference Finals, you can believe that this card is for sure going to be up compared to where it is now. So Devin Booker, still very young, one of the elite scorers in the league, tons of promise and talent around him, and that Suns organization seems to be turning around. So it'll be really exciting to see what happens. Chris Paul obviously still there, and should still have a few years in the tank. So Devin Booker's a guy I think still has some wiggle room. But comparatively, another guy, Joel Embiid, who was right there fighting for that MVP case all season. The Sixers just locked up the number one seed in the East, and he's had injury problems, but less than half of Nikola Jokic. Twice as much, almost twice as much in the pop count. But if you look at these two guys, to me that says concern. People are worried about injury. I really think that's what the problem is with Embiid. People are really worried about the injury. He's actually, he's kind of a cocky guy, but he's kind of a funny guy. I don't generally like arrogant, cocky players, trash-talking players, but Embiid's actually really funny. If you ever watch him on like Hot Ones, where they eat the spicy wings, it's hilarious. So Embiid's the kind of guy who I think if he has sustained success, if the Sixers win the championship, for sure, I would think his prices go up. But if he can have a sustained career, continuing on the trajectory that he's had so far when he's healthy, he's a guy who could get to the end of his career or even just 5-6 years from now with more of a legacy, more of a solid reputation, and could see his prices go up somewhat significantly as people have more confidence in the tenure of his success. But right now, I think that's a reflection of the fact that people are worried about the injury with a guy like Joel Embiid. Now, a really interesting thing, too, actually, is if you compare Nikola Jokic to Julius Randle, they effectively started their careers in the NBA in the same year because Randle, who was drafted a year before, got injured in like the second or third game of that season and missed the entire rookie season. So they basically both started in 2015. And if you look at their numbers, you've got Jokic, who went from 10 to 17 to 19 to 20. And you've got Randle, who went from 11 to 13 to 16 to 21. Last 2 years, 19 and a half and 24, 20 and 26. Randle's not on Jokic's level yet. Again, I'm not sure if he can really get there. Joker is kind of in a class of his own in terms of just this totally unique, goofy, clumsy-looking center who's so highly effective. And that's where it really comes through in the end is like in their player efficiency rating, Nikola Jokic is much higher. I think he's 10 points higher than Julius Randle. But statistically, if just basically looking at their stats, 26, 11, and 8, and then 2 combined steals and blocks. So 26, 11, and 8, and 2. You got 24, 10, 6, and 1. So Randall, I think, not quite the same player, not a great defender, but he is the offensive catalyst and the heart and soul of that Knicks team. And again, the Knicks getting back into the limelight, it's just really interesting to look at. The last guy that I think could be in line for a price increase, kind of because of performance, but in a sneaky way, and his cards are just super cheap for how good he is Rudy Gobert. Now, big men, obviously not a ton of value all the time when they're conventional kind of big men, like my guy Andre Drummond. The big men who can do it all, more like Jokic or more like Anthony Davis or like Embiid, their prices seem to be, a lot higher. Gobert is a defensive specialist. He is the Stifle Tower, but his defense is otherworldly good. Like, he's won 2 Defensive Players of the Year. He probably should have beaten Giannis last year. It was close. Giannis had a lot of mojo around him last year because of the Bucks' success. This year, Gobert is going to win the Defensive Player of the Year award running away, and he's having the best defensive year of his career. And there was a really interesting article just now on 538 about Rudy Gobert and how he's really the only player who fits within every single defensive rating framework as the best over the last 25 years. No matter what the algorithm, no matter what the calculation, he's the best or the top across all of these different, subsets, especially this season, which is, really being called by analysts pretty much historical in terms of his defensive efficiency and effectiveness. So if you scroll down and look at his card prices, super low population. Obviously, this one sold a few months ago, last sale, because it is a low pop 23. So that's why you see this silver, which recently sold for less than that. That tells me his prices are coming down, which you can see here. So as the Jazz locking up a number 1 seed in the West, looking really, really strong, one of their best players, honestly, some Utah fans would tell you Gobert is even more important than Donovan Mitchell. And his cards are not very expensive. $41 for his Select Silver Raw. And the interesting thing is here, Gobert doesn't have a Prism rookie card. He doesn't have a Prism card. This is it. Pretty much this is it. He's got this and another Select one, which is, I think they're called Selections or something. But this is pretty much it. So for a really rare card, $41, when you go out and compare that, go compare that for fun to any raw rookie from the last 4 years, Prism, and compare what you get for a guy that literally is about to win his 3rd Defensive Player of the Year and probably not the last one he'll win in his career. If the Jazz go on a run, if they win the championship, if he just keeps solidifying himself as this great defender, Utah fans alone are going to have enough demand for his rookie cards over time to drive those prices up pretty significantly. And a great example of that is Ben Wallace. Ben Wallace is one of my favorite basketball players of all time. Massive, Pistons fan. That was my favorite era of basketball, period, because the Pistons were so good. And Ben Wallace cards are they're not cheap. His rookie cards get a little funny because they were in the, Washington Bullets uniform, and people don't really care about him then. He was undrafted. He doesn't have a lot of rookie cards. But his Pistons cards, his Topps Chrome refractors, his gold refractors, they go for good money. So anyway, a guy like Gobert, I could see him being, pretty valuable at some point. All right, so that's point number 2, players who are having breakout seasons. So the first one, all-time greats, players who had breakout seasons. The third one is players who were on new teams with stronger or maybe different solidified reputations. And for that, I will show you James Harden and Chris Paul. Now, I've gotten into debates with people about James Harden. I've talked about him on this channel before. I've talked about him in live streams and all the hate being, completely unwarranted for how incredibly talented of a player he is. And he goes to the Nets and he shows that he can take a step back in scoring. He can ramp up the assists. He does play defense, regardless of what people want to say. He's not a phenomenal defender, but he does play defense, and he is good with steals. His cards have gone up significantly. He's on a team that looks like they're poised to make a run to the finals. Everybody's favoring them in the East in spite of them not being in first place. And it's shown 665% his cards have gone up over the last year. And they're all the way up to $4,500 for his Topps base card, which is just crazy to me to think that a Topps base card is $4,500, but that's the truth. Now, Chris Paul doesn't honestly have a lot left to prove other than the fact that he's never made it to the finals or won a championship. But Chris Paul, 5th all-time in assists right now. He'll move into 3rd by next season. He's 5th all-time in steals. He has a chance to climb that list too over the next few years. He's only 36 years old, and I'm going to say only 36 because that makes me feel younger. And like LeBron and other athletes, Tom Brady, Chris Paul takes great care of his body. He's one of the most kind of outspoken vegan players, in great health. If you pull up a side-by-side of Chris Paul's rookie picture and Chris Paul today, I mean, there's almost no difference. It's actually kind of freaky. And he didn't look old when he was a rookie. He just looks that young now. You could mistake him for a 28-year-old player. So he could still keep playing for another 5-6 years. It wouldn't surprise me to see Chris Paul end up on some kind of a super team like so many other, veteran all-time great players have tried to do at the end of their careers and maybe win a championship like Gary Payton and Karl Malone tried to do before my Pistons had to crush the Lakers. So Chris Paul, though, if you look at his card price, $665 compared to $4,500 for James Harden, that blows my mind. I think this Chris Paul card continues to go up significantly over time. Some people hate Chris Paul. They don't like his, on-court antics and some of the sort of tricky stuff that he does. But I think everybody's going to forget about that. I think when he retires, he's going to be considered for sure a top 5 point guard of all time, regardless of whether he wins any titles or not. Right now, honestly, I probably have him as 3rd all time on the greatest point guards list behind Magic and Stockton. So the reason I think that Chris Paul prices have gone up so much is that people saw that he went to the Oklahoma City Thunder last year, and then the Thunder were relevant and a 4 or 5 seed and were competing in the West when they were expected to be terrible. Chris Paul goes to the Suns this year, and the Suns go from, a fringe playoff team last year in the bubble to the 2nd or 3rd best team in the West. And it shows that Chris Paul, every team he goes to, he is the definition of a true point guard, of everything you want a point guard to be on a team. He can shoot efficiently. He doesn't turn the ball over at all. Insane assist-to-turnover ratio. I think he's finally getting the recognition that he deserves for being that, all-time great caliber point guard. So who else might go up this year? 2 players in particular come to mind. There are several that I think we could talk about. The first is Bradley Beal, and I'll go back to this chart that I had up earlier of these players. Bradley Beal pretty much flat over the last 180 days, in spite of averaging 31.4 points per game, 2nd in the league in scoring behind only Steph Curry, and obviously one of the elite scorers in the league. There's no question about that. Beal sort of has been trapped on this Washington team. They're fun right now. They're clicking suddenly late. It was funny because early in the season when they got Westbrook, I, looking at the East, kind of expected them to be like a 5 or a 6 seed, and they obviously were terrible, and then all of a sudden both these guys come back from injuries. Everybody's gelling, and they've been on this streak of winning over the last month or so. It looks like they're going to be playing the Celtics, vying for a 7 or an 8 seed in the play-in games into the playoffs in the East. If they win, if they get in, if they somehow pull an upset, probably unlikely. But if that happened, then Beal's card prices, I would think, would go up some. But even looking at these, it's just hard to... I don't know how long Bradley Beal, a player of his caliber, is going to stay in Washington. There's been mixed rumors. Some people have said he wants out. I've heard it from Bradley Beal's mouth that he's like, I'm not asking for a trade or to go anywhere. So depending what happens, if Westbrook, moves on to the tail end of his career, then you could see a guy like Beal, obviously moving on, expiring his contract or demanding a trade and going somewhere else. I just think it's a matter of time, as long as Beal stays healthy and keeps playing at this level, before his card prices go up, and that could be sooner than later. Another guy who I actually expect to be on a different team, perhaps even sooner than Bradley Beal, is Zach Levine. And Zach Levine's card prices have been somewhat of a free fall, as Chicago's been floundering and terrible this season. But Zach Levine, you got Billy Donovan there. He's got a bunch of young talent and different people to choose from. Kobe White's been getting a lot more playtime recently and has been, playing better than he did certainly the first half of the season, shooting the ball better, not turning it over as much. Levine, he's one of the elite scorers in the league. He's 7th in scoring this season. He's top 25 in player efficiency rating. He can do a little bit of everything. He's a terrible defender, but he's athletic and explosive, and that's what people really seem to care about when it comes to card prices. Now, if he goes to a team that has more defensive structure around him, you could see him flourish, and you could see Zach Levine prices go up next year. So that's the third. Players on a new team and kind of bolstering their reputation or getting new excitement around them. The fourth trend, and this is a quicker one, are players returning from injury. So this year, if I think about two big players in particular who came back from injury, Steph Curry and Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant card prices have gone absolutely crazy. They've continued to go up. A lot of people over the years have really asked, when Durant was healthy, is LeBron James or was LeBron James really the best player in the NBA, or was it Kevin Durant? They're different kinds of players. Durant is an absolute unstoppable scoring machine. LeBron, a more do-it-all, Magic Johnson, Oscar Robertson type of player. So it's hard. It's really hard to compare them. You had Durant go join a super team, where he was, I think, the best player on that team, even better than Steph, and he was the one who couldn't be stopped in the finals. But Durant moving to another team, coming back from the injury, and all of a sudden people are like, oh wow, KD's back. This team is insane. He and Kyrie are gelling when they play together, and Durant cards have gone absolutely crazy. Steph doing it all himself, literally doing it all himself in Golden State. A lot of people couldn't even name another player on that team right now outside of Draymond Green. And Golden State's fun to watch, and Steph is completely unstoppable. So both of those guys coming back strong from injury, seeing their card prices go up significantly over the last year. So who are some other players who are out right now who could see similar price increases? Well, nobody of the same caliber as Steph or Durant. Klay Thompson, though, obviously close. He's been in that limelight, but was never the number one on that team. But his card prices are down 41% over the last 90 days. Jamal Murray obviously went down with that terrible injury, which was a big blow for the Nuggets, and his card prices are down 38%. He's still obviously very young and highly thought of in Denver. Jaylen Brown card prices down 36%. Jaylen Brown's a guy that I've kind of been holding up all year, looking at and saying he was performing better than Jason Tatum this year, especially in the first third of the season, first half of the season. Jaylen Brown was playing better than Jason Tatum. Slightly better. Very comparable, but Brown was looking like the better of the two players. And there have been sort of quietly players around the NBA, analysts, different scouts, and other people saying they think Jaylen Brown actually might turn out to be the better player of those two guys. I have no idea. Tatum, if you look at his body and his wingspan and everything, looks like the better bet. Regardless, Brown sort of has gotten lost in that team because of Tatum's emergence last year. And now there's rumors that the Celtics are going to need to shake things up next year somehow. Do they get rid of Jaylen Brown to see how much they can get back? Do they move Kemba Walker? Do they, Marcus Smart? Something's going to happen. Danny Ainge and they're going to do something and make some changes to that Boston team that has just been a complete and utter disappointment this year. So Jaylen Brown card price is down 36% right now. I mean, I don't see really any risk that those free fall much more, and a lot of potential upside that they go up more next season, depending on what happens with him and where he might wind up in terms of a trade. And then Jonathan Isaac, man, you just got to feel bad. The guy looks like, and he's got tons of athletic potential. He's still really young, and he had that terrible injury last season, and he was injured before that. But he's another big guy that a lot of people have been excited about. It'll be interesting to see if anything happens with his card prices next year. Pretty low point of entry, on an average sale price if you compare some of these other cards. You got his Prism base, PSA 10. Again, low, I like to look at these populations, low pop, even his silver at 280. You could do much worse spending 280 on other, I think, current players compared to a guy like Jonathan Isaac, whose prices have been falling down. All right, that's everything for this week. Thanks for joining me. I hope this was helpful. Those are 4 key trends that I think you can use. And leave me your feedback in the comments. Let me know if you disagree with any of that, or if you have any other players or hunches on people going into this next year or heading into next season. As always, please like this video, and if you haven't already, subscribe and hit that bell icon. And if you'd like more information about Market Movers, which is the tool that I've been using, visit marketmoversapp.com, and you can review all the different features for our Lite and Pro membership. Thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you next time.